One. There we go. Should be about live now. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. I'm your host, Kane Sims, as always, we are lining up an epic conversation today with Hamid Nawab and Ken Sutton of Yobe. Hamid, Ken, how are you doing?
Doing well, Kane.
Pretty
Thanks for
good,
having
thank
us.
you.
Good, good, good. Very interesting product and company, Yobi. We're going to be talking about trying to crack the cocktail party problem, which is we've kind of spoke about this in part in previous episodes. If anyone's tuned into some of the episodes we've done with the likes of Soundhound, talking about voice AI in noisy environments, and we've done episodes with Deepgram talking about the exact same thing. How do you use things like acoustic modeling to train speech recognition systems to be able to handle noise in noisy environments, and with Soundhound we've spoke about all kinds of stuff around using beamforming microphones and all this kind of stuff to try and deal with the problem. I think it sounds as though, correct me if I'm wrong, Yobi has a different approach to this, and I think an approach that would enhance both of those companies' offerings, which sounds a bit cryptic. And trust me, all will be revealed as we get into it. And I know that Ken and Hamid are dying to get into it, so we will do it in just 1 second. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to the Voice Summit, which is coming up in October, on October the 11th. VUX World is going to be at Voice Summit. We're running a conference within the conference, VUX at Voice 22, presented by Core AI. And we're going to be talking about how you can use conversational AI, NLP technologies to automate and streamline your customer experience. Automate the customer experience and streamline your business operations. We've got Core AI as the presenting sponsor. We've got Cognigy are going to be there. We've got, who else have we got there? Vonage and Ericsson. We've got Poly AI and Landry's. We've got Speakeasy. Some really big news coming out of Speakeasy, which is going to be absolutely amazing. So we're going to teach you step by step how to automate your contact center using conversational AI. If you want to be there in person, it is an in-person event. Go to voicesummit.ai and you can use the promo code VUX20 to save 20% on your tickets. Voicesummit.ai and use VUX20 as a promo code. And if you want to learn something a little bit sooner than that, obviously this episode will teach you a hell of a lot, but you can also join us next week on September the 1st, where we're running a webinar with Cognigy. In fact, it's more of a workshop really, where you need to come and roll your sleeves up, and we're going to be diving into customer experience maturity. So if you build out conversational AI applications, or you're working in contact centers and customer experience roles, generally speaking, you want to try and figure out what it is that your team can begin doing more effectively to increase your maturity, start scaling your solutions, and deliver better customer experiences, then this workshop is for you. Go to vux.world/Cognigy to find out more and register. That is vux.world/Cognigy, Cognigy. Okay, that's the beginning spiel over and done with. Hamid, Ken, thank you for bearing with us there. It's always a bit awkward when we do these live ones because I can't kind of make myself cover the screen and give you two a break a little bit. But we're working on it. But I mentioned as we were kind of getting into this, the cocktail party problem, and Yobi and the way that you're approaching solving this is incredibly interesting. I'm dying to get into this conversation. But first, maybe we'll kick off with a little bit of a background in terms of yourselves and your background and where Yobi come from and all kind of stuff. So Ken, maybe we'll kick off with you if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, a bit about your background and how you got to Yobi, and then we'll cross over to you, Hamid.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, Kane. So, I think appropriately, I should start off, and then we should end up with Hamid, which will give a certain amount of gravity to the science of the methodology to a certain degree. My background is a little unique from a tech, entrepreneur, tech founder standpoint. Actually, financier by trade, worked in capital markets for a few years. Fell into Yobi through some experiments that a buddy and I were doing in the studio. And it was really around frequency manipulation. That we came up with something that was, from an auditory standpoint, special. We coined it. We were doing for music and audio what HDTV did for SDTV. It was this interesting kind of really robust spatial sound. And the roots of that came really with something that we were working on with my buddy's friend who is autistic. And it was just really around helping him feel more comfortable with certain acoustic type of sounds and frequencies in certain environments, like in a car where you have a lot of reflections and echoes. So stumbled across something that was patentable, went through the patent process and found that we had a unique swatch of the frequency enhancement universe. So, not being a signal processing professional or engineer, I thought this was going to be really easy for me to code out. We just create some software. We'll be able to let you get it on the App Store and enhance your audio performance. And what we found was 85% of what we were doing was based on our intelligence and our understanding of the content itself. 15% was the actual process, right? And what we were doing in the special sauce. And so I started a quest to look for someone that could help us with that problem. And the universe was very small when it came down to scientists that had both signal processing, in their background, but also understood its applications, partnering with artificial intelligence. And there were, I think, three people that had access, and Hamid happened to be one. I happen to be in Boston. He's in Boston. A buddy of mine is a professor at BU. He teaches at BU, and so stars were aligning. And so, reached out to Hamid with this unique problem. Can you automate this special sauce we have around enhancing frequencies? And I'll let Hamid tell his side of the story. But what we found was what we thought was a frequency enhancement solution really ended up being a frequency repair solution, which is interesting.
Right.
So now you can actually use very aggressive signal processing in situations that you would normally corrode the signal of interest. But we had an interesting way in a kind of a broadcast studio methodology of post producing that signal and building back in some of the things that we damaged through the aggressive signal processing. All of it being controlled by inferential AI that's making decisions, understanding what it's looking at from a signal content. And when you put those three kind of pillars into one bucket, you have the artificial intelligence, you have some very aggressive signal processing methodologies and algorithms, and then you have this broadcast studio enhancement IP. It was, from a founder standpoint, it was lightning in a bottle. We found an interesting way to deal with, the, kind of issues you associate with the cocktail party problem. And we're doing it in a way, nodding to our our broadcast studio enhancement. We're doing it in a way that is uniquely suited to extract linguistic and biological markers from the audio, or from the signal, right? So our software is looking for where is the human part of the signal chain. So where's the biometrics in the signal? And then extracting it in a way that we preserve the linguistic markers you need specifically for human to machine interaction. Yes, of course, a byproduct is it sounds better. Some of our, I'll be careful, some of our three-letter agencies, DC relationships are using it for that particular purpose in the surveillance type of apparatus. But for human to machine interface, we found an interesting value proposition that we can deal with high noise environments in the low SNR range, and we can extract that voice without creating artifacts that would normally damage or interfere with the accuracy associated with whoever the ASR or speech to text partner is on the back end. And so, unique approach to a situation, but that's kind of the evolution of something that, like most founders, we're not doing what we started off doing. There was a few pivots along the way. And we pivoted just when the voice market was starting to get a little bit more ubiquitous with interface and leaving the convenience of your home and going into the real world, where accuracy and acoustic dynamics are challenged, right? And so that's kind of where we ended up.
And Hamid, maybe it would be nice for those who are not quite as into or in depth in terms of their knowledge on AI and signal processing in general, to, as you give us the kind of, a bit of background about yourself and how you got involved with Yobe, maybe first we should explain what the cocktail party problem is.
Yes. Thank you for having me here, Kane. And I would let me start with the cocktail party problem, because in my in academia that Ken alluded to, I've always been fascinated by the cocktail party problem and a companion problem in biological signal processing. That is, you have a lot of sources all at the same time competing to have your attention. And so I guess going back to the 1950s, And that was the analogy made when in the 1950s people first stumbled onto this issue of how do you get to listen to somebody specific when there is other sources of noise in the same environment. And they thought of the cocktail party. So you're in a cocktail party, you're talking to someone, and there's other people talking around you. And we as humans are able to, if you will, beam into the person we want to listen to and sort of exclude the other sounds around us, whether they be music in the background, other people talking, maybe the clink of glasses, etc. It is, after all, a party. But more generally, the cocktail party in the real world, in my world generally today, it's not really a. I haven't been to. I don't think I've ever been to a cocktail party, but
I don't
but
think many people have.
when I do walk out on the street, or if I go into a store or a restaurant, there's all kinds of noise, and the question is, can an electronic device really understand you specifically in those real world environments? As an example, in the comfort of your family room, where perhaps you're the only one there, as long as it's quiet enough, you don't have the TV blaring, your smart speaker is able to pick up your voice. But if there are kids playing around, etc., most of us have the experience of the smart speaker not doing a good job. And that is where we all have pretty much in this day and age encountered the so-called cocktail party problem. Now, from a technical viewpoint, after all, I have my science and engineering background, I got to say that what these devices, whether it's a smart speaker or it's your smartphone, what you really have in that case is two capabilities that are important. One is speech recognition, and the other is speaker recognition. So speech recognition is what somebody's trying to, when the device is trying to figure out what you're saying. And speaker recognition is when it's trying to figure out that it's actually you, i.e., who is speaking. So what is being spoken and who is speaking it. Those are two important capabilities that any good voice interface ought to have. Now, there's good technology out there for recognition and for speaker recognition. Good companies that do this, but generally they require you to talk into a microphone that is close by your mouth. And that's in order to make sure that the dominant acoustic waves are from your voice being listened to. Unfortunately, what makes that kind of technology not so good for the real world, where we might want to be hands-free, we don't want to wear a headset, we don't want to have a microphone sticking in our mouths all the time. The problem is those technologies don't work because they've been developed for clean, relatively clean environments, under the assumption that the microphone is close to your mouth. But nowadays, with smart speakers, with even phones, which we operate perhaps in speaker mode, we can place our phone on the table and have a conversation while there is the environmental noise all around us. How do we make that work? That's been something that for the past, I would say, 30 to 40 years has been of concern to people, and that's what scientific types like me refer to as the cocktail party problem. And it's been a difficult problem. And as you alluded to yourself, it often involves use beamforming, sort of have the device listen in a specific direction so that you could cut out the noises coming from. But that in itself doesn't solve the problem, because when we talk in a room, for example, there are so many echoes. So even though I may be positioned in a particular direction relative to the device, echoes of my voice come from all different directions. And so beamforming is not effective. Beamforming by itself not effective to address the cocktail party problem. So what I'll sort of finish this off with is that what really brought Ken and I together into this, as he mentioned, it started off insight that there was a certain kind of frequency repair that you can do that can take care of aggressive signal processing. But once we put our heads together, I think what really is that we've got to have devices operate more like people do. So when I listen, what do I listen to? What is it? If you focus on what we hear, how we tell, how we deal with the cocktail party problem as humans, we notice that we are able to differentiate between sounds depending upon how far they are from us. So if I talk to you from across the room versus I am standing right next to you, it's not just the loudness that can be different. Although if I'm across the room and I'm talking louder, so that by the time you hear it's the same loudness level as what you hear when I'm right next to you, there is still a qualitative difference. And that qualitative difference has to do a lot to do with the acoustics. And I would just submit here that the one key thing beyond frequency repair that Yobe presents here, the reason we have made progress in cracking the real world cocktail party problem is that we have developed algorithms for being able to perceive the distance of a source depending upon the kinds of acoustic waves that are emerging in the enclosed environment. The environment, whether the environment is a small room, a big room with glass, etc., we don't need to know that. Our technology does not need to know what kind of room, how big that room is. There's no prior models. And that requires a combination of what Ken mentioned, sophisticated signal processing and what we refer to as inferential artificial intelligence. Inferential as opposed to your classical machine learning, which involves a certain amount of training. And that's one more thing I would like to add to our discussion is the technology we've developed here does not require training data. It's not like we've got to go sample all kinds of environments in order to prepare the algorithms. The algorithms use what we call inferential AI. They have the thinking mechanisms that you and I do as well. And sometimes that falls under the banner of unsupervised learning. So our algorithms have unsupervised learning built in, and that's a key to cracking the cocktail party problem.
Interesting. Wow. So there's a lot to unpack in that there then. There's that was very useful as well. Thank you for that. So you mentioned beamforming. A lot of companies try and use beamforming to get a decent enough signal. Mic placement has traditionally been important as well, I've got headphones that I run with, and the mic placement on the headphones they're like earbuds, and the mic placement is on the outside of the earbud, which means that whenever I'm talking to anybody ever, if anything goes past me, nobody can hear a word that I'm saying because the mics they're not facing my mouth, they're facing everything else. But then obviously you've got other things like acoustic modeling and stuff like that. Maybe to piggyback, maybe this is a signal processing part of it. Maybe we should clarify actually before that. I've got a question about this frequency repair stuff because I used to, and still do, I suppose, make and edit audio and stuff like that. So I'm keen to get into some of that stuff. But maybe we should, before we move on, clarify what this means in terms of the output of this technology. Inferential AI, being able to distinguish what noise source is closer or further away, being able to do sophisticated frequency repair and signal processing on people's voices. What is it that actually leads to, Ken? Why is Yobe a company and not a research paper that's discovered something new?
Yeah, so I'll take it from the product market fit standpoint. A few years ago when we started the company, we were doing our discipling, going out to the market and talking about how difficult this problem was, and we didn't get the activity that we thought we should have gotten. And part of it was that the voice market hadn't matured to the point where there were more use cases where this was an issue, right? The smart speaker world had it pretty well figured out. If I'm talking about one of the incumbents, they're using 7 microphones with a reference signal for things that they're playing so they can cancel out their own media. Tons of beamforming you can throw at that problem. You're doing most of your computations in the cloud, right? We have a lot of tools to basically deal with those environmental challenges. But
Quiet environments as well. Houses are not that noisy. The odd Hoover
well,
noise or
yeah, I
kids
mean,
screaming.
yeah,
But
yeah, well, we're gonna have to give credit to incumbents, Kane. In certain situations, they're very good, right?
yeah, yeah, they are.
Um,
Yeah.
they're very good in certain situations, and because they have the data and they have the ability to train on it, because that's how the problem has been approached over the last few years. But what we found was when you remove yourself from those tethered environments where you need something that has to work on the edge, and it has to work in real life situations, like without talking about some of our engagements, if it's a first responder who has to have a call inside of a scene, if it's in the military application where it is going to be loud noise, if it's inside of a cabin of a car where the echoes in the acoustic environment is an issue. If it's in a scenario like you're talking about your earbuds, what we haven't touched on at all here is it's not just a cocktail party problem that we're addressing. We've come up with an interesting solution for wind noise, which is not acoustic. There's physical interference, right? So that's a whole nother battery of issues. What happens when you take these solutions outside? Outside of just the acoustic, you have the wind noise and the environmental noise with those areas. So the use case is very simple. If we were talking to a group of investors, I would never say the statement, which is the truth of the matter is, if you're using voice and having a clean voice signal, whether it be from an auditory input standpoint for humans or an analytics standpoint for a machine, you need the best and the most clear voice signal possible in which to run your analytics on, right? We're agnostic to what you're going to do with the voice signal after we give it to you, right? We are basically giving you the cleanest, most robust version of that signal with all of the data that you need trapped in it for you to run your analytics. So we talk about the cocktail party, and I want to really focus on something Hamid talked about, which is the human part of it. If we think about what we do as human innately, just on a single word, and I like to use this analogy, and to Hamid's point, sound like Mad Men, we said cocktail party problem. But you're in an environment where there's acoustic challenge, whether it be a cocktail party problem or just a party, and someone walks into the venue and they scream fire. So what happens with that interact from a human standpoint? Well, I've already figured out where that person is geolocated to me. They're to my back right shoulder, roughly 100 meters to the back. Got it. I figured out if it was an adult or if it was a child. I figured out if it was a man or a woman. I was able to hear over the noise, but more importantly, I was able to figure out if they were serious or they were joking. All of that happened in a split second with one word. And it's been our thesis that if we don't have clean enough data to pass to machines, we're basically giving signals to our back-end artificial intelligence partners and asking them to operate this communication between human and machine with one hand tied behind their back. Because all of the data they need to get context and all the nuances that you need in conversational AI is already trapped in the signal. It's trapped in the voice. It's just the ability to extract it in a way that's useful is kind of where we focused ourselves. So in any environment where, you speak a lot about conversational AI, there's no more symbiotic relationship between industries than what we're doing on the front end and conversational AI platforms. There is a symbiosis there. We're taking care of the challenge, not in the back end in high computation level. We're doing it on device, on the edge, and giving you raw data that you can basically use to your benefit in a way that allows you to pull out all these other markers, whether it be health detection and some of the more eccentric things that people ask from our signal. We prepare it in a way that allows you to do that. So the use cases are across the voice spectrum, but they're also at the forefront as we see where the voice UI platforms are moving into devices, into areas, and we see a lot of it going into enterprise, where it's around just making our workspace more effective and more efficient, where voice becomes an interesting way to get that accomplished.
Interesting. So it is maybe people could think of it as a pre-processing piece of activity that happens before, for example, a speech recognition engine would run. So right now, what's happening if I say, "Hey Siri," the microphone in my phone is picking up that audio and immediately streaming that once I've said something to the cloud, and the speech recognition is converting that into text, and so on and so on. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're saying here is that Yobe would
Yeah.
sit on the device, do that initial bit of processing, clean up the audio, and then give the speech recognition system the audio, which gives it more chance of accurately transcribing the speech. Is that correct? Or do you also do the transcription?
Well, Kane, if I can jump in here, first of
Yeah.
all, I'd like to make sure that Ken knows this is a pet peeve of mine, but one of the things we don't do is quote unquote the speech, because there's a lot of
Okay.
different ways of cleaning up the speech, which don't really compare to what we do. It's
Yeah.
not cleaning up the speech, and I'll do this by analogy. For example, when you or I are in a cocktail party or in a noisy environment and we are listening to somebody specific, the rest of the world shuts down. We're still listening to the rest of the world. There, except it's a little bit in the background. The person to comes to their voice comes to the foreground. Consciousness, foreground of our hearing, and what the technology that we've developed pushes the voice of interest into the foreground. It is not trying to suppress everything else, and that pushing it to the foreground, and it does it just enough and in a way that is compatible with current and speaker recognizers. And so, because at least if you get into the signal processing theory behind it all, there are time and frequency representations of that are used by all recognizers as well as automatic speaker recognition systems. That in those, what you need is to make sure that those features are clean. And so when Ken was talking about those, the repair, frequency repair, it's perhaps the best way to say it, it's feature repair. It's to make sure that the features are not occluded and that they're cleanly presented to the speech recognizer or the speaker recognizer. And that's that. So the technology is a little bit more than just cleaning, which is why, for example, Ken mentioned that sometimes when you listen to it, it may not sound, you've absolutely eliminated the background, but that's on purpose. That's how people actually perceive, and well, too much of the noise, of the background, if you will, then it's unnatural phenomena that affect not only human hearing, but also how both who is speaking as well as what they're saying.
Right. Okay then. So how do you get? And this is probably part of the secret sauce, like, but if you listen to any piece of audio, let's take a song for example. If you listen to a song, the human brain, if depending on whether you know enjoy music to that degree, Ken, I know you've made music in that in the past, so your brain probably works like this quite easily, which is that you can listen to a song, and if you want to, you can just listen to the drums for the whole 3 minutes. And sometimes this is what I do all the time. I'll listen to a song again. I'll just listen to the bass for the whole song, and then I'll just listen to the percussion. And then I'll just listen to the guitar, and all the time I can never really. It's a pain, I think, of people who've made music in the past, is that you can never actually just listen to something without really listening to it. And so, and the human brain can do that. You can isolate the vocals if you want to, as you've said, Hamid. You know, you can really focus your attention in certain areas. But when you get that signal into a audio production platform, like a digital audio workstation or something like that, if you try and isolate the piano within a whole song, which has got a guitar in there and a bass in there and some vocals in there, it's absolutely impossible because there's so many overlapping frequencies with the rest of the music that you can't isolate the piano as hard as you try. So I suppose the question I'm getting around to is, how do you work out from a stream of audio? I don't know whether this is best directed to you, Ken, or to you,
Well,
Hamid. I'll let you
I'll answer it first, and then I'm going to let Hamid jump in and science it up.
Yeah. So
But
how,
because I'm
how,
going to
how do
answer
you
it from
find?
from working in
Yeah.
the DOS, I'll answer it from a production, or not broadcast, but an audio production standpoint, and then Hamid can clean it. Here's almost the crux of the solution from a Yobe standpoint. We are focusing specifically on voice. This is not sound classification in its classical sense, right? We're looking for voice. And so what does that mean? That means that in the signal, voice has a signature. There's DNA, there's a biomarker in the voice. When you try to separate at a frequency level, you're not getting to the root of the signal itself. So when you think about it from a voice standpoint, our solution is looking for the human biometrics in the signal. That's what we use to lock and track onto that signal of interest. Now, because they're unique, my biometric signature is different than your biometric signature, different than Hamid's. Because they're unique, yeah, a byproduct of that is that we can toggle in between voices because we're looking at unique signatures. Whether we know who it is or not is irrelevant. Our three-letter agency clients, they don't have to know I'm surveilling 3 people and all 3 people are talking. And so they surveil that's speaker 1, speaker 2, speaker 3. The unique biometrics allows us to extract those signals in a way that we can tell who the different ones are. But this same methodology can be used for a string instrument, could be used for a horn. It's all about understanding what's the DNA of that signal, and do you have a methodology to attach that DNA. So that's why in the studio, it's very hard to break with a lot of frequencies. That's why you can't separate voices in the studio. Good luck with that, right? Because they're living in the same frequency range. Right. And so then I'll let Hamid kind of talk to you how we're using it from a Yobe standpoint in looking at biometrics.
Yeah, no, I think Ken explained it well at that level, but I would add to it one thing, that what makes us as humans capable of doing this is fundamentally two ears, 2 microphones, and they are a certain distance apart. And the way nature, there's a reason behind it as to why they are a certain distance apart, and that allows us. It allows us not just to beamform. We're not just walking beamformers. It gives us color to the sound that comes through our ears, and so we can focus on different streams of sound that are coming in, whether that is a voice or. So as Ken correctly mentioned, we have the capability, in our technology, we have focused on voice, and voice we want to focus on it. There are multiple voices, we can distinguish between them because of their individual signatures. But what really helps there is having 2 ears. And we've seen this with our own algorithms. 2 microphones a certain distance apart give you a lot of leverage. They microphones for. Now there are smart speakers that you and more, but that's just to compensate for what the algorithms are incapable of. Because an existence proof. Sorry to talk like a professor, but there is an existence proof of us, right? We have two input channels, and we are able to figure out all kinds of things. How far somebody is, what to zoom in on a voice. Most of us can tell the difference between a voice and, let's say, the sound of a vacuum cleaner. Right? Nobody tries to figure out what the linguistic markers are of a vacuum cleaner. You just don't waste your time trying to, unless you purposely want to do that. But in terms of our human capability, we are very much tuned to voice. And the nice thing is, because of all the research in speech, we have a very good idea what speech is like. We know what the human vocal cords are like, what technically we call the vocal cavity, the mouth, the tongue moving around in all of that, it gives certain features that are very different from produce. A guitar produces sound. The time scales, the physiology is so different. That we have found that you can focus those signatures, and all you need is two microphones strategically placed, much like in a human, and you can develop algorithms that work really efficiently to separate the features of interest from those that are not of interest. And as you correctly pointed out, Kane, that it is very hard when people try to isolate, that was the right word to use, when people try to isolate individual sounds. That is not what humans do. They are not even capable of, because that is not a natural thing for us to do. And an algorithm, on the other hand, algorithms that can move things into the foreground or into the background, and that's getting the sounds moving back and forth adaptively as you listen. For example, if I'm listening to somebody who's walking around the room, they might go different distances from me, and I can still focus on them, and that's because my hearing is around. So that's a very important part of the solution.
When you mentioned there requiring two microphones, does that always? I think we might be having a little bit of an issue with Hamid's video there. Hopefully, on the front end, people can still see. The whole two microphone thing, does that create kind of like restrictions on where Yobe can be used then, Ken? Do you always need to control that two mic arrangement and stuff like that? Or does it not? Is that just like in an ideal world, but you can still run like on a phone with one mic or wherever sort of thing?
Well, okay, most phones have two microphones on them. Smartphones, almost all smartphones have two or three microphones on them already.
All right.
Right. So, I think the industry has figured out that multi-mic is the way to deal with voice, right? You do have legacy systems that are mono microphones. We focus on the two or more microphone scenario, and there's tons of solutions out there for a single mic type of a platform. And we have a single mic solution, but it's not as demonstrative as our two or more microphones. So the great thing about our solution is we don't need to know the relative form factor of the two microphone solution. Like, it's not like we have to preload it, which is the reason why for a lot of our software-centric customers that put Yobe into their SDK as part of their app or how they deploy it, we don't need to know that you have a Samsung, that you have an LG, that you have an HTC, and what is that model's mic configuration and how far. That's not of interest to us. We don't need to have that data. So we do focus on those use cases where we can get two or more unique channels, if you would, because that's where our, if you go back to the foundation of human hearing being kind of the methodology, we use two or more microphones to the full extent of our capabilities. Single mic, a little less, because it's just not a market that we're focused on. And most of our customers have already started exploring, well, I already have a multi-mic methodology. How can I stop using, I was going to trip up and say one of our defense contractors, but how do I stop using multiple microphones and get something into a form factor that's compact, but get the same bounce and the same punch from it? And to Hamid's point, we find that two microphones is effective. More than two gets to a point of diminishing returns after, I don't know, Hamid, what it's 7 or 8 for us. It starts to kind of plateau where the additional microphones don't really give us a lot of benefit.
So maybe to come full circle here, you had asked if we could, with one microphone, uh, do everything. Why do we need? The reality is that the way speech recognition and speaker recognition developed, they have resorted to technologies that require training on data.
Mm-hmm.
The reason they are all solutions, one channel solutions, is because they realize in one microphone, then the whole training game becomes next to impossible. And so, microphone or one channel solution is only viable for speech recognition and speaker recognition as it is currently constituted. But the reality is that devices such as our smartphones have more than one microphone. They can give us the data that will help us solve the problem of getting rid of noise and giving the kind of voice information speech recognition can work with. We bring the world of multiple microphones to speech recognition and speaker recognition because we at Yobe are not constrained to training data. Is only viable when you have only one microphone. Once you have more than one microphone, training data becomes a next to impossible task.
Interesting. Who then? I mean, I can think of a lot of different ways that Yobi would fit into like the conversational AI pipeline. It can be before the speech recognition engine. It could be on the device that captures the signal in the first place, on a phone, on a smart speaker, in a car, infotainment system, all of this kind of stuff. You could probably have it in the call center, enhancing the ability to be able to analyze calls effectively. There's a whole bunch of areas where this can be used, most of the time sitting in the front of the whole process, the entry point to the whole interaction. But what's like if in your minds, what's your ideal either customer or ideal sort of use of the technology? Because it sounds like it can be used anywhere, almost anywhere for anything. So like,
Yeah,
what's your sort of
yeah.
ideal client, so to speak?
So there are some situations, Kane, where we are, and I want to be careful how I say this, we are demonstrative in the results, right? Where it's not a marginal difference, it's a substantial or exponential difference. Um, and those situations would be, I guess, from a use case standpoint. Let's talk about those scenarios when you have a far field voice and interference is closer to the microphone, right? So
All right.
now it's a signal to noise problem, right? The voice is a lower signal. And so when we start talking about, if we're using SNR as a gauge, we can go into the negative SNR ranges, negative 20, 25 dB SNR, where the noise is exponentially louder than the voice. And we can extract the voice in a way that you can still run that through a speech to text engine and you can get accurate speech to text transcription. Right? In those scenarios, it's going to be very hard to come up with a solution like ours that's agnostic to the form factor, is 100% on the cloud, and can adapt to things like user barge in and these scenarios that happen in everyday lives, like our solution, right? But people have tons of use cases for our technology. What we focus in on is, to your point, we can be deployed anywhere in the audio path, if you want to call it the audio path, where we're comfortable is sitting right behind the condenser microphone. And the reason for that is, to Hamid's point around the mono microphone ecosystem, we'll do the multiple microphone capture, and then we'll pass the single microphone off to our partners. And it's nice to do that. If you're on the earbud, I can pass it off through Bluetooth. If I'm on a cell phone, I pass it off in the audio path. There's a lot of different ways for us to package the single microphone output in a way that's convenient for us to do the manipulation and the computation on the edge device, and do it in a way that fits into the ecosystem that already exists. So in those situations, we're pretty bullish and we're pretty strong.
Again, what I would add to that is that looking to the future, we are not going to be as isolated from the world of speech recognition. We are not just preparing. In fact, I think our approach will spread into speech recognition and into speaker recognition that fully involves using the multi-microphone world that is at our disposal, and be able to integrate more closely what we are doing at the front end currently with what goes on inside speech recognition or speaker recognition. So I'm prepared to say that we are not a speech recognition or not a speaker recognition company. We are. We do speech recognition and speaker recognition in noisy environments. For now, we portray ourselves as being pillars, so we can enable any speech recognition system or any speaker recognition system to work in noisy environments. But down the road, I can see us developing the front-end solution much deeper into the sphere of, higher level conversational analysis in terms of speaker recognition or speech recognition.
And Kane, if I can add to that, it's been our thesis that if we look at the on-the-edge capabilities, and Hamid's referencing our future model, if you want to look at our development roadmap, we do think that knowing who's speaking to a device, understanding a limited command or something of that nature in noisy environments is part of what a conversational audio front end should capably give to their partners, right? Because there's a lot of different things you can do with the fact of knowing it's Kane talking at this moment. Yeah, you can clean it up so you can understand the command, but think about the profile retrieving effects that we can have when you're talking to a multi-user device, or the protocols around what permissions do we give you to access different data or different information. It should be symbiotic, where the voice becomes not just the tool you need for text to speech. It should become the identifier of who's giving that said command or asking for that. And our world, we see that as part of a package offering that we want to start to develop for our partners. So we'll take care of identifying who's speaking. We'll do the audio processing in a way that's compatible with your back end. But back to that contextual data of getting as much information from that signal as possible, we want to basically be on the front end helping to basically extract some of that data. We can pass it off to our customer, so we can pass it off to our customer in a usable way.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because isn't it funny how a lot of companies will start out solving a very specific problem, and I think that's the way to go about it in certainly in the voice AI and the conversational kind of space, because there's so much beyond the high level ASR and NLU that there's lots of very, very specific problems to solve. But it's funny how, you start with solving a specific problem, as Yobe is doing, but immediately you can see other places where this relates. So you've mentioned their speaker detection. If you can detect speakers reliably, you can pretty much do voice authentication, which means that you can then compete with pin drop and nuance and nice for voice biometrics. You've then got opportunities to go into things like TV, set-top boxes and stuff like that. Like TiVo, I think, is using pin drop to identify the age profile of someone that uses a voice command on a TV. So if someone, if a I don't know, 12-year-old says play the Saw trilogy or whatever, it'll say, well, actually, you're not old enough for this content, so screw you, or whatever it might be. But it's like there's lots of areas where that kind of conversational intelligence is important, and if you can do that, then you can probably recognize people's emotions. You can probably do some kind of sentiment analysis, and then you are really your conversational. You're already conversational intelligence, because you're already doing some very sophisticated kind of intelligible work on the voice signal. But if you can do that, what I'm trying to say is, I suppose, that there's no reason not to go into biometrics, not to go into
Well,
conversational intelligence, and
yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's like a
So let's be clear. The guys at Penn Drop pretty well. That's a pretty robust solution, right?
oh yeah.
They're pretty good at what they do, and so, you know, I think our approach is a little more measured, and what I mean by that is all of these solutions that you mentioned require one thing in common. If they don't have a robust enough signal to pull out the markers they're looking for, then the accuracy is corroded,
Hmm.
right? So it's not the use case that's driving it. It's the fact that where we sit in the audio path is critical for everyone behind us to operate at a high level of effectiveness, right? And so there's going to be some situations where when you're in low SNR environments where we're going to be a player in that space, not because we have the best, you know, word recognizer or the best biometric solution. We have a biometric solution as well. It's because of our robustness to the environment that allows us to operate at a higher level of effectiveness. And so we become the enabler for all those things to work. And so there is a whole nother scientific and technical part of what happens when you take this interesting artificial intelligence driven solution and you wrap it into the other things, right?
Hmm.
So you wrap it into a keyword spotting where now you have the ability to tell the sensitivity level on your keyword spotter. Well, what's happening in the auditory scene? I have to adjust accordingly because I see the markers associated with a high noise environment. What happens when I want to process a signal because Kane is already enrolled on this device and it gets extremely noisy, but I'm only looking for Kane's biometric signature. I'm not looking for anyone else. There's so many things that you can enhance by that ability for the front end to do the computational and the intellectual lifting to enable the partners on the back end to be a lot more effective and a lot more efficient. That's kind of the roadmap that we have in front of us at this point.
Mm, nice, nice. That's wicked. That's really good stuff. That it's like, yeah, it's. I can definitely see like. There's no reason why every company that's doing anything to do with conversational AI in the voice channel won't need this, because it's like the best results that speech recognition systems can get is around about 90%. 95 if you really want to give it a super clean signal and all that kind of stuff. Um, it's crazy. Is there any other? You don't have to name names, obviously, because this would be probably a bad idea. But is there any other companies doing anything like this? Because this is the first time I've come across this very specific kind of situation before. Is Yobi completely unique, or is there anything?
Yeah, I
Has
mean, I
anyone else
mean,
tried to solve this problem?
that's a loaded question. You're talking to two founders here, right? We're gonna drink the founder Kool-Aid for a while. The truth of the matter is, yeah, there's other companies who are addressing different parts of the problem, right? I think that we all know the usual suspects if you're looking at just what you would traditionally call a traditional AFE or audio front end that does the cleanup and noise cancellation. Um, there's very few that we haven't come across any that are focusing specifically on the things that back-end speech recognizers need to be effective. They are more focused on the traditional way that we thought about, and this is really just the evolution of the technology, Kane. If you think about back before Knowles acquired Audience and other noise cancellation solutions, that's been the methodology, right? Try to suppress the noise.
Hmm.
So our approach to the problem is slightly different, so it has a different output. And so our approach is very unique. And then Hamid talked about things like range filtering. Like that's not something from a technology standpoint that you hear, which is the ability for us to know the distance of a sub voice from another voice. So when you put that into one package, it creates a certain novel approach that handles the problem in different ways. But there are other solutions out there that noise cancel their way out, and in certain situations they're extremely effective. If you have the ability to use, you know, a server for computation, we're looking at something that was done in one of the cards. Is it NVIDIA has one that is fantastic for gamers, But the compute is pretty high. But for that particular use case, it's extremely effective. We're dealing with what we call real world, right? Where it's not canned. You walk outside with your cell phone. You have absolutely no clue what the auditory scene is going to be from 1 minute to the next. What that on edge AI system allows us to do, what it really brings us is a lot of ability to be agile and adapt frame by frame to what's happening in the auditory scene. In those situations, to your point, we're not finding a lot of solutions that can do that. It's the difference. I use Hamid's analogy. The difference between being a race car driver and being a tractor trailer driver. Tractor trailer driver is what you have to do in the modeling type of vernacular, right? It takes a while for you to adjust because you have so much weight and you so much computate. We are a lot more agile in the way that we deal with how signals are coming in and doing it in real time.
So, Kane, let me just say that in a slightly different way, in my own spin on it. I think, you asked, are there other kind of stuff that we're doing? I think, as Ken said, there are. I think, so sort of thinking on more of a grand scale, paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift. The cocktail party problem, not simply as a forming problem, not simply as a noise cancel, but rather as a more complicated problem in which artificial intelligence, and specifically inferential artificial intelligence, really has to play a big part. But the nice thing about it is that it does not have to be computationally intensive. And the people often assume that because it's got artificial intelligence in it, it would have to be a computationally very expensive solution. And as Ken earlier on mentioned, the solutions we've come up with are very realistic. You can put them on a little chip. You can even have them in your light switch, so you can talk to a light switch and have it turn on and off on the basis of recognizing what and your identity. Applications like that, I think, are not in the future, which will be enabled by technologies that, in plural, technologies like what Yobe has. But I think other companies are going to do the same, and I hope there will be competition. I am scientifically trained, and competition is good in that in the intellectual domain as well. Of course, I'd like to see Yobe do well commercially, but there's no reason why others cannot improve upon what we've already done. The cocktail party problem, the real world cocktail party problem, has not been 100% solved. It's not like we are all done. No, we've cracked it. Because it's cracked, it doesn't mean it's been completely solved. We can solve it for certain commercially important real world application.
Nice. You can actually get speakers with microphones in them that would allow you to talk to Alexa. I've been looking at them for my the house that we're doing up at the moment. But if they're anything like the headphones that I've got, then the microphones are probably going to end up in the ceiling cavity and be completely useless. But this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Hamid, Ken. This has been absolutely unbelievable. For those tuning in, go to yobeinc.com to find out more. That's YOBEINC.com. To learn more. And as I said, the last time I felt like this was when I interviewed Qbox, Benoit Alvarez from Qbox, and Qbox have a solution which allows people to analyze the performance of their NLU system. And lots of other companies have done something like that in the past, but Qbox was the first company to say, this is the only problem we care about, and we're going to solve it really well, and are solving it really well. And it was the first time I'd kind of come across technology that was thinking, a lot of these platforms and a lot of these applications and stuff like that, they tend to go really broad and wide. And they're kind of good for what they do. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they've got fantastic solutions, IBM. But every now and then when you see something that's focused on a very specific problem and really nailing that, it has an effect on the rest of the ecosystem which is positive because a rising tide raises all ships, but also having the potential to move beyond that one problem, as you've suggested, into future areas as well is wicked. So Yobe is another company that is. It's every now and then I come across it where I think that's absolutely fantastic, that because it knows what it's doing, it's focused on a very specific problem. There's clear benefits to the rest of the ecosystem, and it's a clear need in the market. So it's absolutely fantastic. So thank you for joining us and sharing your story. It's been wicked.
Kane, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Cool. For everybody tuning in, please do go to voicesummit.ai and do check out the tickets for the event on October the 11th, presented by Core AI, VUX20 to save 20% off, and vux.world/cognitive to register to the workshop that we're running next week on how to improve your customer experience maturity. Ken, Hamid, this has been absolutely fantastic. Also, go to yobeinc.com to learn more about that as well. Cool. See you on the next one.